Hey guys, welcome to a extremely lengthy but extremely necessary summary of what Descartes means when he explains that the I is a thinking thing. Now, you can expect a lot of exam questions related to this, and you can expect, of course, additional work related to this concept because it is a major component of his theory. All right. So we move on from the cogito, that statement that I am because I think, or I think therefore I am, and we move into a consideration of what the I is. But of course, you probably have predicted that the I will have something to do with thinking because, of course, the cogito is the only thing we can be certain of. So let's read what our overall goal is today. We're going to summarize why Descartes argues that we are thinking things. To do that, we need to achieve three smaller success criteria. The first is procedural. In other words, we need to name, define, and interrelate different key terms to develop arguments. The second is also procedural. We need to connect these arguments to arrive at a conclusion about what the I is, according to Descartes, of course. And then we need to look at something a bit more declarative where we explore different aspects of what the I can do. So if you can write these three success criteria down, that would be fantastic. And then if you can score yourself out of 4 in each of them, that'll be great. Once you've done that, I need you to do something really difficult. You can do this metaphorically. You don't have to do this in a literal way. But can you draw a picture that represents the difference between the traditional notion of the soul and what Descartes thinks is the mind? Because once you do that, I'm pretty sure you're going to have predicted a lot of the things that are coming up in this summary video. Okay, this summary video will take a long time, so be mindful of that, and I will be getting you to stop and take notes. Alrighty? So once we arrive at the conclusion, I think, therefore I am, and more or less it's implied, we know it wasn't directly stated, Descartes starts to ask the question, what are we in terms of our essence? We move from our certainty to a kind of exploration about what we are in terms of essence. Or more importantly, and you should probably write this down, we move from proof of our existence to looking for the proof of our essence. Take a note. Now, when he does this, he looks at 4 former opinions that he would have held, and he believes most of society would have held. The first being, am I a man? And if so, well, what is the definition of a man? How do I define what being a man is? Maybe I need to be a bit more intelligent about how I explore this. So then he says, okay, well, the second thing is maybe I am a intelligent, rational animal, right? If so, well, okay, what is the definition of an animal? How do I define this? How do I explore this concept? And of course, what is the difference between the mind and the body, which we kind of slightly allude to, but more importantly, what is it to be reasonable? What is it to be rational? What does that actually mean? And there are no simple answers to this question, so we can't find a productive way of moving forward, all right? Take some notes about the man argument and the rational animal argument. And number 3 is, okay, well then am I a body? And then he says a body is defined as anything that has shape, a location, and occupies space to the exclusion of all other bodies. Take a note about his definition of what a body is. And then he says, but if I am a body, then to get to know what this body is and to understand what the body is, I need to use my senses. And of course, that could be an optical illusion generated by the evil demonic genius that is deceiving me. And also, when I think about it, a body it can't actually be what we are because we are capable of movement, sensation, and thinking. And if we were just a body, like a corpse is a body, because a corpse meets the total definition of what a body is in space, then of course, these things aren't happening. So there must be something else to me that isn't a body. Take a note. So then he goes on to something which is much more complex, and it's really important that you get this, you get Aristotle's argument, because it's a key part of a text coming up in Unit 4. So his fourth previously held opinion was maybe it's the soul which animates the corpse or this kind of corporal matter and allows it to perform those other functions we discussed: action, thinking, sensation. And to do that, well, he thinks if it is a soul, maybe I should look at Aristotle's definition of the soul. So take a note. And Aristotle's definition of the soul follows a function argument. So it says different types of souls achieve different functions. Take a note. Now, if we look at plants, they have one type of soul. They have what we call a nutritive and vegetative component. And the nutritive and vegetative component of their soul, or function of their soul would be an even better word, allows them to grow. It allows them to perform the function of growing. So take a note, that's what plants have. The second is the definition of the soul of an animal. Now, an animal can sense its environment and it can will itself to move. Plus, it also has this nutritive and vegetative component, so it can grow. So it has these two things plus those two things. And it has the function then to allow it to sense its environment and move around, but as well as that, it can grow because it has the nutritive and vegetative component. So take a note about an animal's function, or what an animal can do, or what an animal's soul allows the animal to do, hence why we call it a function. And of course, a human being's soul, according to Aristotle, allows for the sensitive and the volatile, or the volative, which means sensing the environment or moving. It also allows for the nutritive and vegetative function, so it can grow over time. But of course, what makes a human unique is their unique function, which is the soul can think. Now, this is all Aristotle. This isn't necessarily Descartes, but Descartes using Aristotle to help him arrive at a particular conclusion. Okay? So write down the unique function of a human soul. Now, what's really key is that you remember that even though we have this unique function, we also have the functions of an animal and the functions of a plant attached to the definition of our soul. So it's not just that we are rational thinkers, it's just that this is what we have uniquely when compared to animals and plants. So, this idea of being the reasonable, the soul that can reasonably function, has overlaps with the definition of the soul of an animal and a plant. And these definitions of the animal and the plant are still heavily related to the body. The functions that belong to an animal and to a plant are heavily related to the body. And that means that they could easily be part of the demonic genius's illusion or grand deception. So we can't really use the soul as a way for defining the I, because obviously there are certain concepts involved in the human soul, be they the functions that also belong to animals and plants, that are easily, we could easily argue, could be deceptions. Doesn't mean they are, but if there's a chance that they could be, then it's ruled out because we're looking for the 100% certainty of our essence. Okay, take a note. So what's the answer? Well, the answer is that I am a thinking thing. And this kind of makes sense too, because when you think about Aristotle's definition of the unique function of a human being's soul, it is thinking, right? And he's rejecting the corporal or the physical elements of the other parts of the human's definition of the soul. So again, it's like the process of elimination. You can say it is just basically the thinking component. That's what's left over. And that's what is still 100% certain. And again, this also makes certain, is basically certain because it relates to the cogito statement. I mean, if I think, therefore I am, proves that I exist, the fact that I exist would logically argue that I think. And that's the only thing I can be certain about, right? So the I inside the cogito ergo sum thinks. We all know that. So the concept of the soul is too associated with concepts of physicality, so it has to be rejected. And we can only say that the 100% thing that I am certain of is that I am a thing that thinks. Take a note. So how do we arrive at this using some kind of standard form argument? Well, if thinking is immaterial and I am certain that I think, I can only be certain that I am immaterial. You might want to write down a brief standard form argument that summarizes why he concluded that he can only be certain that he is something that thinks. All right. So I am a thinking thing, right? And that means that if you look at what are other synonyms, I could be a mind, I could be intelligence, I could be an intellectual, or I could be simply just the form of reason itself. But these are things that I could be because they kind of relate to what a thinking thing is. A thinking thing from now on is called the mind. It equals the mind. And when I put a double equals here, I'm using what's called comparison operators in computer programming. I just want to show you that I like to use my own shorthand. And a double equals means that this equals that. It doesn't mean I'm assigning that a value. It's just a program language. If it was just a one equals, it would be an assignment operator, but if it's a double equals, it means it's a comparison operator saying that equals that. So the thinking thing equals the mind, and then the basic ergo sum res cogitans is pretty easy to figure out. All right, I am a thing that thinks. That's basically what ergo sum res cogitans means, because you can hear cogitate in cogitans. You know, ergo means therefore, sum means I am, res means thing. It's related to the word reification, which means to convert something into a thing. So I am a thinking thing. All right, take a note. Again, really, really big flag here. We're only finding the 100% certain component of the I, of the essence of what the I is. This does not mean that there are other things to the I. There easily could be more. But, and I stress this really loudly, but the only thing at the moment that we're 100% certain of is that, and I'll make this really important, that I am a thinking thing. So, what types of thinking are there? You know, what types of thinking are there? Because we know that doubt is a form of thinking, or maybe even being deceived, which requires you, once you're aware of it, to doubt, is a form of thinking. So, okay, let's explore different forms of thinking. And the first one he explores is imagination, which he says is a little problematic because when you imagine, you're always imagining things about the physical or the corporal world. And when I say corporal, I mean a three-dimensional body in space. So maybe you should write down a definition of what corporal means. Corporal really means body, but in this case, because we're using it philosophically, we're going to say corporal equals three-dimensional body in space, just to give us that extra information. And then we have this point here. He argues again, look, remember when I said that I can imagine myself having shape, extension, and form, which are properties of the corporal, in a dream? Well, you know, I could easily be in a dream, and imagination could imagine things that are in a dream. So I can't use imagination to discover more about what the I is. Again, I have to use more reason that doesn't involve imagination. But I certainly can say that imagination is a form of thinking because it requires the I as a subject to perform the action of thinking. So take a note. Also, he believes that the subject of the I is involved in other forms of thinking that are extremely important. That is basically doubting, understanding, affirming, saying yes, this is, making a judgment about yes, this is, or no, this isn't. Willing, actually, you know, willing to do something, and perception. You need to write these down, and I'll repeat them for you again because they are so important. Not only do we have imagination, which is performed by the I, we also have doubting, understanding, affirming, willing, and perception. Take a note. But what you have to remember too is that when it comes to perception and imagination, you can easily make mistakes using perception and imagination. But again, it's the I that performs the action. It's the I that is the subject performing the action of perception and performing the action of imagination that is involved in the process. So perception and imagination can't really tell us anything 100% certain about what the I is, but we can definitely say with 100% certainty that there is an I performing perception and performing imagination. All right, so let's have a look. If you drew a picture where you tried to represent the mind as not having materiality or no physicality, or it didn't have a corporal presence, you'd be pretty accurate. You'd know why this APK was necessary. We did name and define a lot of things. You need to know the four different opinions. Am I a man? No problems. Am I a rational animal? No problems. Am I That was the one. Am I a body? Well, actually, when you think about it, too reliant on physicality as a concept or something to get to know. So, evil genius could be deceiving me. Let's examine the function argument of the human soul, or overlaps too much with concepts of the body, so there's a problem with it. Let's just take out that thinking thing component that Aristotle touched on. Oh yeah, I am that, because basically if you look at the cogito, it says if I am certain because I think, then I have to be certain that the I actually think. Yeah, let's move on from that and look at the different forms of thinking. So again, we arrived at the fact that the I is a different form of the I is basically the subject that thinks. The I is the thinking thing. Or again, we could say that in Latin as ergo sum res cogitans. And we did explore the different versions of thinking, which would be imagination, doubting, understanding, affirming, willing, and perceiving. All right. So if you're okay with all that, well, you've done really well. If not, you need to come and talk to me. And remember, this is just a summary document. You must do the reading with me. If you don't do the reading with me, you're not going to do that well. So that's the next video. And thanks for listening.